as a family, take your time. You don't have to do anything. And if anybody says like you do, you don't.
Right.
You don't. Like, you don't have to commit to a college right away. You don't have to pick an agent right away. You don't have to pick a financial advisor. You got to make decisions when you're comfortable and you're good and ready to make those decisions.
In today's episode, we have an inspiring conversation with Jacob Turner. Jacob is the founder of Moment Private Wealth. He is a seasoned financial advisor who specializes in helping 7- and 8-figure athletes safeguard and grow their wealth. But before embarking on his financial career, Jacob was a professional baseball player himself. He was selected with the 9th overall pick in the 2009 MLB draft. He was a top 100 prospect, and he made his major league debut at the early age of 20. He enjoyed parts of 7 MLB seasons before ultimately concluding his career in Korea. In this episode, Jacob delves into the intricacies of financial management for athletes. Drawing from his unique dual perspective, both as a former big league player and as a financial advisor, he shares invaluable insights into the world of finance. Jacob explains the role of a financial advisor and why he views himself primarily as an educator. He highlights the 2 essential services that all financial advisors can provide and discusses why accepting the eventual end of an athletic career can actually empower better financial planning. We explore effective communication strategies with athletes around money, and we discuss the appropriate age for families to begin engaging with financial advisors. Jacob also walks us through the crucial support financial advisors offer during the draft process and the significance of understanding the true value of a signing bonus. Additionally, Jacob shares his personal experiences forming his own advisory team, emphasizing the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people, and he cautions us against the dangers of having yes men in your circle. He reveals the number one question everyone should ask when assembling their support team, be it agents or financial advisors. And finally, Jacob shares his perspective on why there are no bad outcomes in the draft. Whether you're a parent curious about financial advisory for athletes or a player looking to get a better grasp of financial management, this episode will offer you valuable lessons and insights. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Jacob Turner, thank you for joining me, buddy. For those of you who are obviously listening, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine, somebody who is shares in your experience. Just to be frank, this is a guy who played high school baseball, was drafted in the first round, 9th overall in the 2009 MLB draft, ended up debuting at 20 years of age in the big leagues, and then played for parts of 7 seasons in the major leagues. He is now what I would describe as a financial advisor. But Jacob, I guess from your perspective, how would you describe what it is that you do?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So it's funny you say financial advisor. I think that was like a term I didn't really endear to a couple of years ago. And the reality is we help people with financial advice. But I think more so than that, even just trying to be an educator around the financial services space, specifically with the athlete goal in mind. And Matt, like you mentioned, my experience was signing as an 18-year-old. And a lot of those experiences led me to where I'm at today.
So when you meet people, right, you meet these parents and maybe some of these players that you're looking to help. How do you describe, because it's funny, as I've gotten to know you over the years, I feel like we're similar in that even though you can put our career kind of in a box where you say, okay, well, I'm an agent for major league players, but that doesn't quite quantify like our value in a player's life. So as I think about what it is that you do, I mean, you're somebody who really kind of walks step by step with a family, whether it's through the draft process, right? Helping advise them on their signing bonus and how to break things up. But it's also, as you look at a player's journey through the minor leagues and even into the big leagues, like you're somebody right there with them along the way. So like if you were talking to a parent who has a kid at 13, 14, 15 years old right now, and they're thinking about one day their kid's going to play in the major leagues, like how exactly would you help them understand not only the value that you would provide to them, but really what they need to look out for as they're kind of just starting in that journey?
Yeah, man, what a loaded question. As you and I both know, there's like a million different things that they should look out for. I think first and foremost, like they just need to be educated, right? And that's a process. That's not something that happens overnight. And they need to start asking questions. And before they ever make any big decision, what I tell every family is like, get really well educated so you feel confident in whatever decision you're making, whether that's an agent in the future, a college in the future, maybe a financial advisor if you end up signing or getting NIL money. I think for us, like the biggest value add that we add to families is at some point baseball is going to end. And with baseball ending, what that means is like at some point the money that you are earning is going to end and you're going to be moving on to what's next. And the two things that I can guarantee is like for the folks that work with us, like you'll be better educated. You'll be able to be in control of your financial destiny because we both know that on the baseball side, like there's a million things that are outside of your control. On the financial side, like there's a lot of things that are inside of our control. Like we can take the money that we make really good decisions and have a 10 out of 10 financial outcome, whether we make $1 million total in baseball or we make $100 million. I think thirdly, trying to have a sense and a constant notion that like at some point this will end and that's okay. It doesn't mean that your focus shouldn't be away from the field by any stretch, but baseball for all of us ends, right? Whether it ends at 30 like it did for me or whether it ends at 40 like a future Hall of Famer.
Do you find that it's challenging when you meet some of these parents or even players? Because I think when people talk about money, it can be overwhelming, right? Even in our own worlds. And I think a lot of times people, especially players, it's such an overwhelming idea that maybe they hold themselves out as being somebody who understands it or at least says they understand it, maybe when they don't. And so when you're working for these players or even for the families, is that a challenge that you kind of go through? How do you handle those conversations when you start kind of walking them through that? Like what is, how would you describe that?
Look, it's a huge challenge, but I think the biggest thing that I always go back to is it's very easy for me to put myself in their shoes. Like I can vividly remember as an 18-year-old. I mean, I met with one financial advisor, nobody else. And the reason why I picked him was simply because I felt like they weren't going to take my money and steal it. Right. Like that was my decision-making point because I didn't know anything else. So I've been in the shoes where I'm like, I don't have any questions to ask. You seem nice. You know somebody else that I know. Let's do this thing. So what I try to do is always put myself in their shoes. And when I say that, what that actually means in reality is the terms that I use a lot, the analogies that I use, a lot of times are sports related because what my goal is like, they don't have to be the expert on their financial situation. Just like you as the agent, like they don't have to be the expert on contract negotiations and the CBA and everything that's going on behind the scenes, but you want your players to be educated, right? Like, and when an offer comes to the table, just because it's a lot of money, you need to outline like, here's the pros and cons. Here's, if we turn it down, here's what the next thing could look like. If we turn it down, here's what the downside looks like. And really, we're doing the same thing on the financial side. We're trying to educate them along the way. So my goal is each time that we have a conversation, not to try to overwhelm them, but maybe it's one or two little nuggets that they take away that they can always go back to and say, hey, remember we talked about having money in buckets 1 and buckets 2, and that made me feel really confident and comfortable. But we didn't talk like super deep financial terms and different stocks and PE ratios and all that stuff.
When do you start to meet these families and players? Like what's an appropriate time for you to introduce yourself, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, my stance on it is, I think you and I both know like this game, whether it's the financial advice game or the agent game, college game, is getting earlier and earlier. I don't think that's a great thing, to be honest with you. I think my goal is with high school guys, like we only talk with the parents until they're comfortable with us talking to their son. Because I know when I went through this process, we had people that reached out to me directly. And as a 17-year-old kid, like I didn't know what questions to ask. My parents didn't really appreciate it. And I know if my parents didn't appreciate it, there's a lot of parents out there that wouldn't appreciate that. And then on the college side, I think a lot of times it's kind of a 50-50 on the financial side. Like sometimes you're reaching out directly to the player. You might be talking to a 20, 21-year-old kid that has really grown up into becoming a man and they're ready to make that decision on their own. A lot of times they still want mom and dad really involved in that decision. So it really depends on the family situation. The number one thing that I try to do is I tell every family, like whether you choose us or not, if you go through the process with us, I can assure you you'll be better educated. And if you get to the end of it and we say, hey, you know what? Let's part ways as friends and this maybe isn't a good fit for us today. Like I'll help you find somebody that you think's a better fit than our firm.
Right. Well, and that's something that I think you and I both share is this outlook on truly wanting to kind of add value to a player's life, even if that means, and I've said this to families, like, look, if I do my job, it's to educate you and put you in the best possible position to evaluate making this decision on who should be the right agent for you. If that means you think you want like this really massive firm, that's okay. That's just not what we're about. Right. And it doesn't mean that you're looking at it the wrong way or I'm looking at it the right way. It's really just really trying to figure out what it is that you're looking for and what it is that you want for your son throughout his career. Going again, I guess, through the draft process, what are some of the things that someone like you could help a family with through that process? I mean, obviously, I know what those things are,
Mhm.
but if you could maybe describe what that would look like. I think a lot of families who are listening have kids who play and obviously, may have kids who are good enough to be drafted. And, I've heard stories of financial advisors reaching out and selling all these different things to them. Like, walk me through that if you
Yeah,
could.
let me start by saying that if anybody reaches out and says you have to do something, you should just like hard stop. You don't have to do anything. So if you're a family, a parent, a player out there, and somebody's pitching like this fear selling mentality, like if you don't do this thing, this really bad thing's going to happen, it's not true. Like take your time, get educated. Nothing bad is going to happen. Ultimately, as a player or the family, like it's going to dictate the player's talent level on the field, his desire, his ability, all these factors that go into play if he ends up signing. But what we try to do is really start at the beginning and help them understand just like what does the draft process even look like. I just wrote a blog post on this because it was one of the biggest doubts I had. Like, okay, so I'm good enough to get drafted. Now it's looking like I might sign. Okay, I kind of understand like the minor leagues, but like when I sign, like when do I get paid? And then where do I go? And what does like the first year look like? And what things should I be thinking about? Because look, the money's great and like it's a huge component of whether a player signs in the draft or not as a Major League Baseball player. But I didn't start growing up playing baseball and loving baseball because I thought I was going to make millions of dollars from it someday. And I think that's how 99.9% of kids are. They grew up because they love baseball. And when they get drafted, they want to make a good first impression. So what our job is first and foremost to try to educate them on the draft process. And Matt, I think it's probably the same for you. Before we ever start talking about the
Mm-hmm.
financial component, on the financial side, there's a million things you could look at. The one thing that I think is the most important for them to look at is understanding what is the true value of the signing bonus. Once we've educated them on the different options that are out there, the service models that are out there, why we might be a good fit for them if that's what they're looking for. If they choose to work with us, it's really helping to educate them on like, here's what's actually going to hit your bank account at taxes, agent fees, everything else that comes out. And then what does it actually look like for you in your life? And what I mean by that is like, if baseball doesn't work out the way that we hope it does, right? We're going to cheer you on as optimistically as possible, but we're going to plan as pessimistically as possible because the reality is like, it might not work out. We might not be a 10-year big leaguer and make $200 million. And if it doesn't, what does this money actually mean for me as maybe a 28, 30-year-old that maybe doesn't have a college degree? Maybe it's going back to get a college degree. Maybe has a college degree, but doesn't know what life looks like next.
So, as I said earlier in the podcast, so you're somebody who was a first round pick, 9th overall, get to the big leagues at the young age of 20, played for parts of 7 seasons, and then something happened along the way where you decided, hey, look, I think I'm done,
Yeah.
right? Did that happen fast for you? Did you see it coming? Was it a conscious choice, or did you feel like maybe the game was telling you it was time to move on?
I think it was a combination of a lot of things. Like for me, and to give context for people listening, like I got to the big leagues at 20 as a top 10 prospect in all of baseball. So like for all intents and purposes, I thought I will be here for the next decade plus. I'll be an established starting pitcher, with the goal of winning World Series and making all-star games and all this stuff. And it didn't work out like that. So there was this huge period, 5+ years of me really battling like, man, this is not how I thought it was going to go. And then ultimately, like the
Mm-hmm.
acceptance of that, probably in like year 6, year 7, was probably the best thing for me because it allowed me just to like take the weight off my shoulders and go back to just like enjoying the game, competing, and letting the chips fall where they may. So to answer your question, Matt, my last year I played in South Korea, and really my goal there was first and foremost, it was a really good opportunity. I was going to be able to pitch. I had gone to driveline that offseason, so essentially my biggest weakness was I couldn't strike out enough guys. So I was trying to figure out like, how do I get more swings and misses? And we had tweaked some things to see like, okay, can I get the swings and misses that I know I would need to be back in the United States and be successful at the big league level? I did that year. I felt like I made some changes, some adjustments. It still didn't go the way I was hoping for it to go. And ultimately, I just remember thinking like, my heart wasn't in the day-to-day grind that it takes just to have a chance of success. And if my heart wasn't in the day-to-day grind of that, like I was doing myself a disservice. I was doing my family a disservice. I was doing a player that I would take a spot from away a disservice if I wanted to keep playing.
Do you have any regrets?
I don't have any regrets. I think there's a difference in my mind between regrets and like, would you do something differently? And I don't have any
Sure.
regrets because my stance on it, like from the get go, and this was something that my dad ingrained in me and my 2 brothers from the time we were born, was if you want to do anything in life, like you'll generally have like one or two opportunities to do it. And then like when that window is closed, you're gonna have to move on to what's next. But as long as you put your best foot forward, you work as hard as you can live with whatever the results are. Now, look, like I wish the results in my pro career were different. Like I'm still really proud of like what I accomplished,
Right.
but man, like I had a ton of talent, and I thought for sure like I would look back in 2024 as a 2009 draftee and see different numbers on my baseball reference page in terms of like what I would do differently. You know, like as a 33-year-old now, like I have a different perspective on life than I did as an 18-year-old. I would have still worked just as hard, but there's a lot of nuance that goes into pro sports and goes into coming up through the minor league system and dealing with failure and all these different things that, frankly, I don't know if I would have the mindset I have today if I didn't experience those failures. But if I had the mindset that I have today, I do think some of the results probably would have been a little bit different.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you talk about this and I try to, I think about all these different kids who, and really families who, they go through their baseball career, whether it's, out of the draft, minor leagues, even in the big leagues. And everybody has this belief that there is 100% certainty that they're going to get drafted, they're going to get to the big leagues, they're going to reach arbitration, they're going to sign their massive contract. And over time, you start to see how that belief maybe start to change. What's, I guess, difficult for me to see is when kids allow, some of these challenges ultimately that we, having seen the game, know that they're ultimately going to face. But when they come to those moments in time, not having the tools to kind of overcome those things or get past that stuff. And that's where I think whenever you have, whether it's an agent in your corner who's been through it a ton, has the experience, but isn't only interested in, let's just say, negotiating your contract, but really working with you daily to, whether it's maintain your mindset or just help you through these difficult life challenges, I think it's important. I think in what you do, that is extremely important. And you know this, obviously, having played in Major League Baseball, but as a player, you need to have a team of people around you who are giving you this sense that they're there supporting you, I guess is what I would say. And for some reason, I think whether it's agents who try to represent too many players, financial advisors who look at it strictly as only a business, a lot of times these players make these tough decisions on who do I want representing me or who do I want handling my money at such an early age. And then they just kind of like say, okay, you got it. I'm going to just go play baseball. And sometimes that leaves them at the hardest moments in their life being really overwhelmed and not equipped to handle those challenges going forward. So there's no question in there. That was just more of a comment about just based on, again, what it is that you do, what it is that I do, and some of the challenges that these players are facing.
One thing, Matt, I would add there is I think one of the biggest issues that I see, and I'd be curious to hear your take on this, is exactly that point that you made where you and I both know that when a player gets drafted, like his level of confidence is really high. He has a belief that he'll be a big leaguer. If he didn't, he wouldn't have gotten drafted, right? He wouldn't be in the position he's in. You and I both know whether he ends up becoming Mike Trout, Jacob Turner, or somewhere in between, there's going to be a lot of challenges, highs and lows along the way in that journey. So it's finding times when we can both instill the fact that like, hey, there's going to be challenges in the future. Let's keep our foot on the gas. But when those challenges come up, I also think it's making sure that you have people in your corner that are willing to have like a real life hard conversation with you. Because what I see time and time again is this. You get people in your corner, whether it's anybody, it could be an agent, a financial advisor, family, friend, etc., somebody on your team, whatever. And they don't really want to shoot you straight. Like they don't want to give you the honest truth that you actually need. And I can remember like the people that helped me the best in my career were the people that like when I got off the phone with them, I was like, I'm frustrated. Like I'm frustrated that he even said that. And then 30 minutes later, I'd be thinking about it. And I'm like, you know what? He's right. Like I need to stop doubting myself. I need to stop having self-pity, whatever it was, right, in that situation. But a lot of people on my team would never say that because I think a lot of times like they don't want to get fired. And that's where I go back to like, I call it like having the yes man. Like you can't have the yes man on your team in professional sports because the reality is like, this is a hard business. So you need to make sure that you have people on your team that are like, yeah, they're going to support you. But at the end of the day, like if we need to have a tough conversation, whether that's a financial conversation, a baseball conversation, a life conversation, that person's willing to have it with me. And I know they are, which I think just gave me a ton of confidence knowing like, if I call this guy, like I'm going to get the truth. So I'd be curious, like how you handle that, because it is a delicate situation when a player is going through something like that.
Hey man, I'll be honest. Like that's one of the biggest reasons why I decided to start this company. for those who are listening, they know like I worked at 2 really large agencies, and not to speak poorly about any of them, but basically, I saw firsthand over 20 plus years in the business how a lot of agencies and agents are motivated by what you said, which is this fear of being fired. So when you're motivated from that perspective, you're guiding a player through things, but there's a line that that you can't cross. And the line that you don't want to cross is, well, I don't want to tell him anything that's really going to upset him.
Mm.
And when you actually understand the role of an agent, right? Just speaking for my own personal self right now, when you understand the role of an agent, I have to be so committed to what's best for the player that even if I say something that's going to make him unhappy, guess what? I still need to deliver that message. And it's not to be disrespectful. Like there's a clear difference there. But I certainly need to be committed to saying or doing what I believe he needs in order for him to reach his highest potential and achieve his dreams. And that's where I don't know that agencies, the way that they're built today, when they're representing 500 players, and again, like that may be what you're looking for, I just don't believe that you can be as committed to really doing what's in that individual's player's interest. Because what starts to happen, I believe, over time is you're starting to be motivated by the brand of the agent and the agency. And that kind of trumps ultimately what's important for the player in any one given moment.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's a challenging situation. And like you said, I think you outlined it really nicely. Like there's a difference between saying something that is not right or disrespectful in a scenario, but like the reality is like you need to have hard conversations. I see, like I'll give you an example on the financial side. I see time and time again, guys have what I call like the 4 out of 10 outcome. You're not going to see them on the front page of ESPN. They're not broke, but they're certainly not in the position that you would want them to be in based on where their career was, how much money they earned, et cetera, et cetera. And oftentimes it's because they had a yes man their entire career. They had somebody that was like, yeah, you could go buy the new car. Yeah, you can go buy the new house. And the reality is, they could go buy it, but nobody outlined to them like the pros and cons and the value of maybe delaying that gratification a little bit. Or hey, if we tweaked it and we bought a house that was 75% as expensive, here's what this would look like in the future. They just didn't know that as a player. And I think that's where, whether you're an agent, whether you're a financial advisor, whether you're anybody on a player's team, professional sports is a business. And at some point it's going to end. You want to make sure that the people that are on your team during the process are pushing you towards the 10 out of 10 outcome, and they're not dragging you back to a 4 out of 10 outcome.
Yeah. And I think you probably share in this sentiment. I think there's you have to have the experience, right? In your case, you have to have the experience. You've been through this before, both as a player, but also on this side of the business as well. But you also have to have an interest in building a foundation for the relationship. And I think that's an important component that oftentimes gets lost, especially with agents. But I also think with financial advisors as well, where sometimes people maybe choose somebody who they think is really good because they have all of these players, they have all of this, they call it AUM, right? Assets under management. But they don't really have any interest in creating a relationship with this person who's going to be managing their money. I'd be curious to know, like, what are your thoughts on that?
So here's a question that I think everybody should ask, whether you're hiring an agent, advisor, and there's no wrong answer to this question, but just to be clear, it's a question that you need the answer to, is if I hire you, and when they say you, what they really mean is like, if I hire your company, who am I working with on a day-to-day basis? And moving forward, who am I going to be working with? Because I know for me, like, I hired a bunch of different people, whether it's financial advisors or my agent, et cetera, et cetera. The people that I was working with inside of those companies wasn't always the person that I thought I was going to be working with at the beginning when I said yes. And that doesn't mean it was bad, but I wasn't clear on the upfront. Like I was hiring this company, but really I was hiring the person I was talking to. And then I realized like, oh, I'm not actually hiring the person I'm talking to. I'm hiring like this other thing, which is fine. I just wish that's a question I would have asked before I said yes. And I think that's a question every player should ask. Again, there's no wrong answer here. Like there's all different kinds of business models are out there. You have to find the business model, whether it's agent, college, financial advisor, NIL deal, et cetera, that works for you. But the reality is you need to understand, like, if I go on and I'm Jacob Turner and I get to the big leagues at 20, but then at 23, I'm in AAA, I'm not as important to the agent anymore. The reality is like, I'm not on track to make $100 million at that point. So if that's the case, like who am I talking to then? Because that's a realistic outcome, right? And I think you just need to go in eyes wide open. It goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, Matt, that like, you don't have to do anything. Get educated, ask the right questions, ask as many questions as you need that you feel comfortable with the decision you're making.
I love that point you just made. One of the things that I do in these meetings, right? If I'm meeting with a potential client and his family, I actually give them a series of 7 questions that I say, if you're going through these meetings with agencies right now, like these are a series of questions. You can ask one, you can ask all 7 if you'd like, but they're questions to get to the heart of the things that you and I ultimately know goes on in this business. And one you just actually described, but it's who am I dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
right? One of the questions you're going to laugh is, when was the last time you were fired and what were the
Yeah.
circumstances? And for me, if I am committed to doing what's right for the players, I have no problem sharing that answer.
Yeah.
But as you know, in a meeting like that, how uncomfortable must that be for the agent who's like, oh, hold on, wait a second. I don't know that I want to jump into this. Because again, you're kind of turning the tide, so to speak, in the meeting. Which look, I mean, if this is ultimately somebody that you're going to trust with your life, you should feel comfortable kind of with the dialogue and seeing them maybe have their back against the wall. And there's nothing to hide from in that regard.
Well, I think too, like, and Matt, I know you know this, but like, you start asking questions that are like second level questions that are outside of, the normal typical questions. And to me, it's not even really about like the answer that somebody gives. Like, it's important, but if they have like a good answer behind everything and they're really doing right by the client, like the answer should be solid no matter what, right? And then you're deciding like, hey, what kind of business model do I want? What size do I want, et cetera, et cetera. But the minute you ask them a question and you're just looking at them in the eyes and you can tell, you're like, oh, wow, that made them feel really uncomfortable. That should be a little bit of a red flag to you, because the reality, like, they're coming to this meeting and there's no agent, there's no financial advisor, there's nobody on any professional baseball player's business team that's coming to a meeting and like acting like they're hiding something, right? But the minute you ask that question, no matter what the answer actually is, you can usually tell right away. You're like, oh, there seems like there's more there.
Right. Why are they so uncomfortable talking about that? Yeah, because it does. Well, one of the things I oftentimes say is, in the agent business, agents treat it like a sales business when in reality it's a service business. And that's a perfect example. I think one of the things that'll make an agent uncomfortable is because they're in this sales mode, right? They're selling the shiny object. And now, okay, wait a second. I need to think about what I'm about to tell you is not going to make me look good. At least that's what they think. So you'll see in real time, like how they're changing, maybe whether it's their facial expression or just how their mind's working as far as how they want to tackle that question that doesn't make them look bad.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why I love the question.
Yeah.
So
I think I think in another life, Matt, I think my greatest job would actually be like, all I do is I just go around with potential baseball players and I just help them interview people for like their financial team, their agencies, college coaches, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you and I both know, like, if I'm in that meeting, like, I'm asking questions that like you're probably not thinking of, that is probably going to make that other person be like, wow, that's a really good question. Nobody's ever asked me that. But I think ultimately, like, that was my biggest struggle when I went through this process. Like, I never hired an agent before. Like, what questions do I know to ask? And everything that somebody says, it sounds good because, like, that's the whole point. Like, as you said, like, they're in a sales pitch. And that's not discrediting any agent out there, anything that anybody does. Like, that's just the nature of the business. Like, you're going to put your best foot forward. But that's why I go back to time and time again, like, as a family, like, take your time. You don't have to do anything. And if anybody says like you do, you don't.
Right.
You don't. Like, you don't have to commit to a college right away. You don't have to pick an agent right away. You don't have to pick a financial advisor. You got to make decisions when you're comfortable and you're good and ready to make those decisions.
Yeah, exactly. And you feel like you have all the information you need in order to do that. There's a term in your guys' business called RIA, Registered Investment Advisor. What is that?
Yeah.
Can you share what that is for people who don't know?
Yeah. So RIA just stands for Registered Investment Advisor. And really in my industry, financial services, there's really 2 big buckets that groups fall into. Either one side is broker dealer and one side is RIA, so Registered Investment Advisor. And the way that I would break down the difference is this. There are all different kinds of business models that are out there. Some I think are better aligned in the client's interest, but there's bad people working in those too. Okay. So first and foremost, like, I just want to preface this by saying, like, you have to find the right people. In terms of business models, the way I break it down is like 3 different areas. There's products and solutions that you have, the advice that you're giving, and then the fees that somebody's ultimately charging. The thing I love personally about the RIA side is I think the fees are as transparent as we can possibly be. look, with any fee you're paying in life in general, you should be getting some sort of multiple of value of the fee that you're paying. But that person should be able to write it down in crayon for you so you understand, like, here's exactly what you would be paying if you chose to hire us, right? The second area is products and solutions. So on the RIA side, the thing that I personally like, and the reason why we're structured this way, is we have the autonomy to go out and say, hey, if it's not on the bookshelf behind me, it doesn't mean that we can't implement it for you in your life. If it's the best solution for you, we can go out to the entire marketplace and implement it. And then ultimately, this third part of it's like the advice that we give is separate from the products and solutions we're selling. And you're held to what's called a fiduciary standard, which to me is like a basic starting point for financial advice. It just means that we have a legal obligation to serve the client's best interest. And who in their right mind wouldn't want that if they were hiring a financial advisor?
Right.
So again, the two big buckets are RIA, broker dealer. It's not to say one is better over the other. We're structured as an RIA, and really it's because of those three things I just mentioned.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And then when oftentimes families hear this word custodian a lot. How would you describe what a custodian is?
In the most simple terms, a custodian, think about it like a bank. Okay, they're the one that are actually holding your money. So at an RIA, we use a separate custodian to hold the money. So oftentimes, we've all seen these horror stories of somebody got their money stolen, right? A professional athlete got ripped off by their financial advisor.
Yep.
Well, one of two things is happening in that scenario for that even to be a possibility. One, either they have power of attorney. Power of attorney means that they can write checks in your name. Okay. So if they do have power of attorney, that doesn't inherently mean it's a terrible thing, but you need to understand the power that you're giving them. Or secondarily, like they are actually the custodian themselves and they're actually holding the money for you. So for us as an RIA, we are holding the money at a third party. And again, I think it just adds an additional level of checks and balances where we can't move money, send money out without the client signing off and acknowledging it, which I think is a really important step,
Right.
especially for younger players. When you're first getting into this, like there's so many things going on. You just want to make sure you have as many checks and balances as you can possibly have.
Can you help people like when people hear the term, and one of the things I'm wanting to help for, these families who are listening is there's all these different terms that I think are thrown out there, and it can be a little overwhelming if they've never heard these things before, or they've been in a meeting and this person is throwing these terms out and they just don't know, like, what does that mean? What's important? Put yourself, you brought up something, I think a couple minutes ago saying, Matt, I think in another life, I would help prepare families for these meetings. I give these questions to these families for these agent meetings. If there was something that you wanted to tell these families who are interviewing these financial advisors, like, are there 3 questions that you would tell these families? Like, these are the most important questions that you could ask any financial advisor.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually did a YouTube video on like the questions that I would ask. And I put like 7 questions in there. The one question that really stands out to me is, and I think this is a great question to ask towards like the end of a meeting with whether it's a financial advisor or an agent, is why should I hire you? Right? Like typically if you've gotten to that level with a family and you're in a meeting with them, like there's already some level of trust built. But like the reason why I love that question, like why should I hire you, is it will help you be able to see very clearly what they value. And as an example, on the financial side, if somebody asked me that question, like, why should I hire you? I would say, look, like the reality is like, there's a lot of really good people out there that can help you with financial advice. And the other reality is like most of the answers that you're looking for, you can probably find on Google, but how you're going to relate that back to your personal financial life as a professional baseball player is really unique. And I've walked in your shoes and we've done this over and over again for people. And like, I can guarantee one thing, like you'll be better educated and we can get you a 10 out of 10 financial outcome. Okay.
Love that.
That answer is going to be different for every financial advisor. And I think it just lends itself. There's no right or wrong answer to the question, but it helps to shed light on what is really important to this individual. A couple other questions I think are really important to ask is, like, what is your expertise? And they might say like, oh, we serve professional athletes. Well, go to their website. Like, does their website have a lighthouse with a couple that's 65 years old on it? Because that's what most financial advisors' websites have. And if it does, like, how are they really specialized in serving professional athletes? Or does it like, you go to our website, like first and foremost, in 5 seconds, you see like, we serve these 2 groups of people and we say no to essentially everybody else. And I think because of that, like you can have more specialized advice, which I do think really matters. The third question that I would ask is like, what is your client to advisor ratio? One thing you mentioned earlier, Matt, is like, you think there's a lot of agents out there that probably have too many clients for the capabilities that they have. You want to make sure that, like, if you hire somebody as a financial advisor, that there's going to be a level of focus not only on you, but they're also going to be there for you in the future. Like, we're making plans that are decades long, hopefully. So you want to make sure that, like, there's going to be that expertise there. But those are a couple of the questions. The one, like I said, the one I love the most is just asking, like, why would I hire you? What separates you from everybody else?
Well, yeah. And again, like, there isn't a right answer, as you said, right? Through that question, I think you're going to get to know a lot about just that individual, what's important to them. And hopefully they tell you something that you like, and maybe that is the guy that you ultimately go with. But I do love that question. Just me speaking personally here, man, like, I think this business needs a lot more people like you. I've seen financial advisors in the space where, yeah, they advise, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way. They advise doctors and lawyers and, high wealth individuals, and all of that is fine too. But if they don't have any sort of experience in advising professional athletes, there could be, it's a challenge, right? The life of a player's career in this game can only be, for a very short time. They have a very short window to make their money. And so I think part of the biggest challenge that you guys ultimately have is, like, okay, knowing what a player's career looks like, how can we best serve him, given this short lifespan, and then whatever he wants to do after that. So I do think you offer a really unique set of circumstances, having played the game, having been a financial advisor now for a period of time. And just me personally, I do love the fact that you're doing some of this heavy lifting, online and through YouTube and things. And I'll add in the show notes the video that you're describing, that you asked those 7 questions as well. Is there anything else that just comes to mind that you feel like this is an important thing that all these families should hear?
I think I'll give 2. One, on the draft side, is I think families need to understand that, like, there's no bad outcome when it comes to the draft. Especially high school families. It is a very emotional time, and whether you end up signing or not, or whether you're really committed to college or not, there's going to be kind of this pull to want to sign. That's normal, because, like, at some point you want to play professional baseball. But the one thing that I wish families understood more of was, like, there's no bad outcome. Like, you going to a top Division I school and getting a college degree and playing for hopefully 3 years and then getting drafted, hopefully higher than where you got drafted before, that's a pretty good outcome. So, like, you have option 1A and option 2A. It's not like I have option A and then I have option C down here. And then on the financial side, the other thing that I would say is, like, every financial advisor and financial firm is not created equal. And you need to find the right fit for you. And I think this industry, unfortunately, is probably the most generic. Like, there's hundreds of thousands of quote unquote financial advisors. And it's the one area that I would just really encourage parents, families, like, ask questions, get educated, feel confident and comfortable with whatever decision you're potentially making, because it does make a really big impact, right? Like, Matt, you guys are handling so much of the life in baseball and on field and off field marketing, all this stuff. But the financial component of that is really big. And the decisions that you make as a young athlete the first 5 years after you get drafted have a massive impact on what the rest of your financial life and the rest of your life in general looks like for the next 30 plus years.
You brought up something that reminded me of what I oftentimes tell families in meetings. So if I'm advising a player and their family, it's a high school kid. As you said, as I know, a lot of these kids, they all want to play professional baseball, right? So they start buying into, I don't want to say buy into the hype, but they buy into the rankings, and they think, oh, scouts are going to my games. This is all going to go well. And hopefully it does go well. But I think sometimes these players set themselves up to be disappointed. And what I mean by that is, if you go through the draft process and you're relying on, let's just say, area scouts telling you that you're going to be a first round pick, chances are that you could be disappointed if the scouting directors aren't showing up or the cross checkers aren't showing up. But I oftentimes tell these players, look, you have a great opportunity, however this goes, whether you go to college or whether you sign. So why not, let's buy into this idea that we're going to end up in college. Because if for some reason that doesn't happen, it's because some team just came to you with this life-altering amount of money, and you feel so committed to going to play professional baseball, and now you're fired up and you're ready to go. right? Unfortunately, some of these kids, they don't do that. They buy into the hype. And then at that point, they just basically go through the draft. And if it doesn't work out in their favor, well, now they don't want to go to college
Mm-hmm.
because, well, I didn't really wrap my head around having to do that. I thought this was all going to work
Yeah.
out for me. So now they sign for less than they wanted and they're bummed out, right? Or if they didn't even have an opportunity to sign, now they're on campus and they're bummed out. When they should be fired up. That should be one of the most exciting things in their life. And so it's really just kind of changing that perspective in their mind because as we both know, you're only going to go out there and perform at a high level if you feel like you're equipped and prepared and mentally in a good place in order to do that.
No, 100%.
It's one of the most controllable things I feel like is the player's mindset, at least in how you look at college and how you look at professional baseball. So totally off topic. I got a question for you. What do you miss about the game? Do you ever go to games and you're like, I said this the other day, my brother and I are at a game and I'm walking on like the concourse and I look down at the field and I said, man, I miss it. And he looks at me and he goes, what, are you going through a midlife crisis?
Yeah.
It's been a while. And I said, no, I mean, it's always before a game for me when I see guys walking down the line, like stretching, because it's like you're getting ready to go out there and compete and the juices are flowing. And I never played in the big leagues. Like I never even played professional baseball, but it was in college. But I miss that. Is there something that you miss about the game?
I went to a game with my son last year and we're watching a guy and I was just so taken aback by like there was 40,000 people there. We were at Busch Stadium here in St. Louis, which is where I'm from. Like, man, what a cool opportunity. Like they get to play in front of 40,000 people. But as a professional baseball player, it often just becomes like your routine. You're just so used to it. You almost become numb to the fact that like you're playing in front of all these people. You know, Matt, the thing I miss the most, it's definitely not shoulder programs after a start or hip mobility stretches
Right.
or things like that. But as the starting pitcher, especially of the home team, when you know they announce the lineup and then you get to run out on the field and like the mound is just totally fresh and brand new for you, and like the umpire throws you the ball and like you're throwing your warm-up pitches and you're like, man, this is the big leagues. That feeling, like I don't know if you can replicate that in any other sort of life. I certainly haven't found a way to replicate it.
I love that. Have you been back? I'm assuming you've been back to Detroit to see a game since you've played, but have you?
So I watch baseball somewhat sparingly. Like I watch the guys that were able to help because I cheer for them. I watch former teammates of mine, friends of mine. And you know what's interesting is I watch it from such a different perspective now. Like I just want it sounds like this mom view of it is how I would call it. Like I just want everybody to do good. And the reason why I say that is like
right.
I just know the feeling of you being the pitcher and giving up the 3-run homer after you went 5 innings and you're like, man, like I'm one out away from like a really quality start with 2 outs in the 6th inning. I just gave up a 3-run homer and now we're down 5-1. It's like, man, that stinks. I know the feeling of, you know, being in that slump where you're like, I just can't break out of this. And I think from my perspective, like I watch players even at the high school level or the college level, and really what I'm looking for is like, how are they carrying themselves? Whether they get a hit, whether they don't. Like most of the guys that I'm going to look at, like I know they have an incredible amount of talent. Like I'm not looking to see if like the talent level is what I think it is on paper, right? I'm really looking to see like, you know, do they have that it factor? So I watch it from a completely different viewpoint now.
I share in that. I think when you spend a lot of time, I get on both of our sides of the business, you meet these players and it's, you can have a conversation for 5 minutes
100%.
and you can feel like, you know what,
Yep.
I feel like I know whether this player has it or not. And there's nothing worse for me. And it bums me out when you meet somebody who's got so much physical potential, but they're asking the wrong questions. And the more you get to know him, the more you feel like, I don't know, man, I just don't know if he has what it takes between the ears. That doesn't mean it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's more of just this, are they going to be able to overcome the obstacles that are undoubtedly going to be in his path? And yeah, I mean, that's, you know, easy for me to say having never played professional baseball.
No, but I think you're spot on, man, because like you and I have both seen so much baseball and it is so clear to me. I can watch a guy for a couple days, and then if you have the opportunity to talk to him, it either really solidifies in your mind what you were already thinking, or it's like, oh, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I caught him on a bad day or a bad stretch. But oftentimes, like you're pretty spot on. Like I've seen enough baseball, I've played with enough guys that have had success where the level of talent for the middle 80% in the big leagues is about the same. Now, like there's guys at the top
Mm,
10% that just have an ungodly amount of talent that like, I'm sorry, they're just better than everybody else. That's just the fact. But the middle 80%, like
right.
really the separator there is like the mindset that they carry themselves with, the consistency of the mindset that they have, where like they can show up the next day to the field after getting bombed for 3 innings, and you're like, that guy doesn't seem phased at all. Like he's on to the next. And that's something that it's hard
Hmm.
to teach that.
Have you noticed how the game has changed in the last 10 years? And what I mean by that, at least specifically what I'm speaking about is, and I'm sure you've noticed these trends in baseball where the platoon role is becoming much bigger now, right? I remember Kurt Suzuki was a client of mine, and I remember he was, for me at least as I recall this, he was one of the first guys. He platooned at the catching position when he was on the Atlanta Braves, and it was really the first position that I felt like teams looked for this platoon to kind of start. And now it seems to me that it's turned into almost every position. It's either you're the superstar and you're playing every day, or more than likely you're the rookie who's just getting the opportunity to see if he's going to be the superstar. But everybody else, at least hitter wise, falls into that platoon role. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I think the thing I say, and I think it's just gotten more and more apparent, is what teams look for is true outlier tools. And then they want to combine outlier tools with the ability for you to do multiple things, right? They want you to be the Swiss Army
Mm,
knife. I think Chris Bryant is a really good example of this with the Cubs. Like he was a, I don't know, second overall pick, third overall pick, top 5 pick in the draft. Gets to the big leagues. Obviously, he's had an amazing career, but he was the first guy that I saw where I was like, oh, this guy's like a superstar, all-star guy. And they're like, he's playing in left one day, and then he's playing third base one day, and he's playing first base one day. I grew up in the era of like Albert Pujols dominating for the Cardinals, and like thinking, I mean,
right.
when he first got called up, I think he had like a couple starts in left and a couple starts in first. But like once he became Albert Pujols that we all know, he's a first baseman. Albert Pujols, like he plays first base. That was the first time I'd ever seen a guy where I was like, oh, this guy's like a real star player, and they're moving him all around the field, and it's adding a ton of value. And yeah, I think teams are looking for that now. Like they want to combine outlier tools with the ability and the functionality for you to do a bunch of different things on the field.
Right. Well, I think conceptually it makes sense. And again, going back to the Suzuki analogy, he hit, say, if you look on average, 10 home runs a year, right? Well, if you compare him with Yan Gomes, who hits 10 to 15 home runs a year, and these guys are ultimately playing 162
Mm-hmm.
together, that's 25 homers from your catching position. That's pretty
Yeah.
good, right? And so it makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things, though, that these teams haven't seen yet that we'll ultimately see in the future, it's like there's players out there who could have become better, but will they ever get that opportunity,
Mm.
right? Will that older generation of player who played till he was 35 or 40 on the field, will he still get the chance to play to 35 or 40, or will the game recycle him out at 28 years
Yeah, I
old?
think you and I both know the answer to that, unfortunately. I mean, I can
Yeah,
remember
unfortunately, I
when I
think you're
first
right.
got called up, like even my AAA team at the time, Toledo Mudhens AAA 2011. I mean, these guys were like vets of professional baseball, like a bunch of
Right.
guys 30 plus years old. And I'm going to tell you right now, like I got a ton of value out of like just understanding like how professional baseball worked just by being around those guys. And then, when I first got to the big leagues with the Tigers, like we had a veteran team. Like we had guys like Magglio Ordonez, Carlos Guillen, Brandon Inge. Like there was a lot of guys that were 30 plus years old that had been doing this thing for a long time. And there was a ton of value in like how they went about the process, because a lot of those guys were on a different path of their career. Like they had peaked physically, right? Maybe in their 29 to 32, 33 range, but now they were still succeeding with their own different skill set and like understanding the game more and understanding all the nuances more. And that's the part that stinks. And the other part, you mentioned this, you kind of touched on this too, Matt, was like, I think baseball is one of the only sports, baseball and golf are really the two sports I think of where a guy could struggle or maybe not really find his stride until the second half of his career. And I think oftentimes now in
Mm.
baseball, like guys aren't even they're not getting the opportunity to find their stride. Like if you don't find your stride by let's call it 28 to 30, your chances of finding your stride after that are pretty low.
Yeah, I mean, I've got clients right now who these guys got 5+ years in the big leagues. They're in AAA at the moment, and yeah, they're playing, they're performing at a high level. And then you get to the end of the season and you realize, wow, there's a limited amount of interest in them as a free agent, because guess what? If this is going to be a guy who's going to take up, call it, 250 plate appearances over the course of the season. Maybe they're more inclined, instead of paying that guy $1 million to $2 million, let's go give it to the young kid and see if he can do it. Right. It's one of the reasons why I think a lot of these older veterans are just waiting for expansion.
Yeah, no,
there's just,
it's interesting because as like a numbers guy myself, like I understand the numbers behind it and like it's hard to argue with the numbers. But at the same time, baseball is such a nuanced game in how it's played and even like how players conduct themselves now. Do I think the game might be more entertaining? Sure, like there's some more entertaining moments, but and maybe it's old school of me, but like I like some of the like more traditional elements of baseball that really aren't around quite as much. Like I like the game policing themselves. I like seeing players play hard, and like that means like a hard slide from time to time. That means a hard slide. Like I don't know. It's definitely changed a lot, and hopefully we continue to have like fan interest and viewership and things like that because ultimately for people like me and you, like this business supports a huge ecosystem around it. Like I love the game of baseball. I think it teaches you incredible things, and I'm hopeful for the next generation of big leaguers.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, buddy. Well, listen, man, I can't thank you enough. I do want people to know how to find you. Can you share a little bit of, I guess, whether it's your Instagram, your YouTube channel, what would you want to
get? You can find me pretty much anywhere on social media. I post almost every day on Twitter or X, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube. My handle on all the platforms is the Jacob Turner. And then you can find our company website, momentprivatewealth.com.
Fantastic. Well, buddy, I appreciate it. Can't thank you enough. This has been great. You're awesome.
Appreciate you, man.